The market does not know you exist. It does not recognize your entry, your stop, loss, your emotions, or your intentions. It does not reward patience or punish impatience in any conscious way. It simply moves based on order flow, liquidity, probability, and the collective actions of millions of participants. There is no awareness behind price, no hidden intention targeting your trade, and no emotional response embedded in market movement. And yet, despite this objective reality, the human brain struggles to experience trading in such neutral terms. The mind is not designed to process randomness comfortably. It is built for pattern recognition, meaning making, and cause and effect reasoning. When something happens, especially something negative, the brain instinctively asks, "Why did this happen to me?" This is where the illusion begins. When price moves against your position, even if the setup was valid and the loss was statistically expected, your brain does not register it as a neutral event within a probabilistic system. Instead, it interprets it as a consequence. It feels personal. It feels directed, not logically, but emotionally. The movement of price becomes a story rather than a statistic. And once a story is formed, emotion follows. Loss, in particular, carries a deeper psychological weight than most traders anticipate. Financial loss is not processed by the brain as a simple subtraction of capital. It activates survival mechanisms. On a subconscious level, money is tied to security, stability, status, and competence. It represents control over one's environment and future. So when a trade results in a loss, the brain does not calmly categorize it as part of a system. It reacts as if something important has been threatened. This is why even small losses can feel disproportionately uncomfortable. The nervous system amplifies this reaction. Increased heart rate, subtle tension in the body, faster thinking. These are not random sensations. They are physiological responses to perceived threat. And crucially, the brain does not clearly distinguish between different types of threat. Social rejection, physical danger, and financial loss can activate similar neural pathways. This means that being stopped out of a trade can feel, at a deeper level, like being rejected or exposed. It is not just about losing money. It is about what that loss represents internally. This leads directly into what can be called the identity trap. At some point in a trader's journey, trading stops being just a skill and starts becoming a reflection of self-worth. This shift is subtle and often unnoticed. A profitable trade begins to feel like validation. I am smart. I am capable. A losing trade, on the other hand, starts to feel like a contradiction of that identity. I made a mistake. I'm not as good as I thought. I don't understand this. Once identity becomes fused with performance, emotional stability becomes fragile. Every trade carries more weight than it should. Wins elevate self-image, diminish it. Instead of engaging with the market as a series of independent probabilities, the trader experiences each outcome as a personal evaluation, creates emotional volatility that has nothing to do with the market itself and everything to do with internal perception. From this foundation, personalization bias naturally develops. This is the tendency to interpret external events as if they are directed at you personally. In trading, it shows up in subtle but powerful ways, like "the market took my stop" or "reversed right after I entered." May seem harmless, but they reveal an underlying distortion. They imply intention where none exists. They suggest that the market is reacting to you rather than you participating in a much larger system. This bias creates a false sense of importance, but also a sense of victimhood. The market is perceived as something that acts against you, then losses feel unfair rather than expected. This emotional framing makes it much harder to maintain objectivity. Instead of analyzing whether a trade followed your system, you begin focusing on how the market behaved toward you. Shift subtly removes responsibility from process and places it onto an external force, which further disconnects you from consistent improvement. Another critical layer of this illusion is the attachment to outcomes over process. Beginners often evaluate their trading based on results. A winning trade is seen as confirmation of skill. A losing trade is seen as evidence of error. This creates a constant need for validation. Every trade becomes a test of competence rather than an execution of a system. Professionals, on the other hand, operate differently. They understand that individual outcomes are largely irrelevant in the short term. What matters is execution quality over a large sample size. Trade can be perfectly executed and still result in a loss. Conversely, a poorly executed trade can result in a win. When you focus on outcomes, you reinforce emotional reactions. You focus on process, you build consistency. The problem with outcome attachment is that it strengthens personalization. If your sense of competence depends on whether a trade wins or loses, then every outcome feels personal. You are no longer observing results. You are internalizing them. Creates a feedback loop where emotion influences behavior, behavior influences results, and results reinforce identity. Breaking this cycle requires a fundamental shift in perspective. Begin to see the market for what it is, an impersonal, probabilistic system that does not operate with intention. Price movement is not a message, is not feedback about your worth or intelligence. It is simply the result of countless interactions between buyers and sellers. At the same time, you must recognize the role of your own mind in shaping your experience. The tendency to assign meaning, to personalize outcomes, to attach identity to performance. These are cognitive processes, not market realities. They feel real, but they are constructed internally. When you understand this, something important changes. Stop feeling like rejection and start being recognized as expected variability. Missed trades stop feeling like failure and start being seen as neutral events. Trades stop inflating identity and instead become confirmation of process alignment. This does not mean emotions disappear. The brain will still react. The body will still respond. The difference is in how those reactions are interpreted. Instead of accepting them as truth, you begin to see them as signals. Temporary responses generated by a system designed for survival, not probability. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to remove the illusion that the market is personal. That illusion fades. You no longer feel targeted by losses or validated by wins. You step out of the narrative and into the process. And from that position, consistency becomes possible, because the market has changed, but because your perception of it has become aligned with reality. Emotional trading is not a sign of weakness. It is the natural outcome of deeply ingrained psychological mechanisms operating exactly as they were designed to. The problem is not that traders feel too much. It is that the brain applies survival-based responses to an environment governed by probability and uncertainty. To understand why discipline breaks under pressure, you have to look beneath behavior and examine the internal systems driving it. One of the most powerful forces at play is the ego protection mechanism. The ego's primary function is to maintain a stable sense of self. It wants to feel competent, capable, and in control. In trading, this creates a hidden conflict. Every time you enter a position, you are not just risking money, you are risking being wrong. And for the ego, being wrong is not a neutral event. It is a threat. Trade moves against you. The loss is not experienced purely as a financial outcome. It is interpreted as evidence that challenges your identity. This is why traders often react defensively. Instead of accepting the loss as part of the system, they resist it. They move stop losses, deny invalidation, and jump into revenge trades to fix the mistake. These actions are not strategic. They are protective. The ego is trying to restore its sense of competence as quickly as possible. Closely tied to this is the illusion of control. Humans are wired to believe that with enough knowledge, effort, or skill, outcomes can be controlled. Belief works well in structured environments, but markets are not fully controllable systems. They are dynamic, influenced by countless variables beyond any individual's reach. Despite this, traders often carry an unconscious expectation that if they analyze correctly, they should be right. So when the market behaves unpredictably, it doesn't just feel random, it feels unfair. This perceived injustice triggers frustration and, in many cases, anger. The mind struggles to reconcile effort with outcome. I did everything right. Why did this happen? Question is rooted in the assumption of control. When that assumption breaks, emotional reactions intensify. Another critical mechanism is variable reward addiction. Trading is one of the most psychologically reinforcing activities because of how rewards are distributed. Wins and losses do not follow a predictable pattern. You can have multiple losses in a row followed by a big win, or a series of small wins followed by a sudden loss. This inconsistency creates what is known as intermittent reinforcement, the strongest behavioral conditioning systems. The same principle that makes gambling addictive. When rewards are unpredictable, the brain becomes more engaged, not less. Win produces a surge of positive emotion, confidence, excitement, even euphoria. Each loss produces the opposite. Frustration, doubt, and emotional discomfort creates a cycle of highs and lows that strengthens attachment to outcomes. You are no longer just trading a system. You are riding an emotional wave driven by reward anticipation. Over time, the brain starts seeking that emotional high, which can lead to overtrading, impulsive decisions, and difficulty stepping away. Social comparison adds another layer of pressure. In today's environment, traders are constantly exposed to the results of others, profit screenshots, winning streaks, bold claims of success. Even if you consciously know that these representations are incomplete or selective, the subconscious still reacts. Seeing others succeed creates a reference point. Your internal evaluation shifts from "Am I following my process?" to "Am I performing as well as they are?" This shift is subtle but damaging. Begin to feel heavier not just because of the financial impact, but because they signal that you are falling behind. This perception amplifies self-judgment, introduces shame into the equation, which is far more emotionally intense than simple disappointment. And when shame enters the process, decision-making becomes even more reactive, as the mind tries to escape that feeling as quickly as possible. Equally important is the role of emotional memory encoding. The brain gives special priority to experiences that carry strong emotional weight, especially negative ones. A significant loss, or even a series of smaller losses during a stressful period, can create vivid memory traces. These memories are not stored as neutral data. They are stored with emotional intensity. The next time you encounter a similar setup or market condition, the brain retrieves that memory automatically. It doesn't just recall what happened, it reactivates the associated feeling. This can lead to hesitation, fear, or premature exit decisions. Even if the current trade meets all your criteria, the brain is trying to protect you from repeating a painful experience. But in doing so, it distorts your perception of risk. It overestimates the likelihood of negative outcomes and underestimates your ability to manage them. When you combine these mechanisms, the ego's need to be right, the illusion of control, the addictive nature of variable rewards, the pressure of social comparison, and the influence of emotional memory, you begin to see why emotional trading is so persistent. It is not random. It is structured. Each mechanism reinforces the others. Ego makes losses personal. Personalization increases the need for control. Lack of control intensifies emotional reactions. Variable rewards keep you engaged despite inconsistency. Social comparison amplifies the emotional stakes, and memory ensures that past pain influences future decisions. Understanding this changes the narrative completely. Emotional reactions in trading are not evidence of personal failure. They are predictable outputs of a system designed for survival, operating in an environment it was never designed for. The market is not attacking you, and you are not uniquely flawed. You are experiencing the intersection of biology and uncertainty. The real shift happens when you stop labeling these reactions as weakness and start recognizing them as mechanisms. Because once you see them clearly, you can begin to work with them instead of against them. You can create structures that reduce ego involvement. You can accept uncertainty instead of trying to eliminate it. You can detach from the emotional highs of wins and the lows of losses. You can limit exposure to comparisons that distort your perception. And you can reframe past experiences so they inform rather than control your decisions. At its core, personalization in trading is not a reflection of the market. It is a reflection of the mind trying to make sense of randomness. And when you understand that, you move one step closer to operating with clarity instead of reaction. Personalization in trading is not just a psychological inconvenience. It has direct, measurable consequences on performance. The moment trading outcomes become tied to identity, every decision begins to carry emotional weight. That weight distorts judgment, disrupts consistency, and slowly erodes the statistical edge a trader depends on. Makes this dangerous is that the damage does not always appear immediately. It builds quietly through small deviations, subtle adjustments, and emotionally driven choices that seem justified in the moment but compound over time. One of the most common expressions of personalization is overtrading to prove something. After a loss, especially one that feels personal, the urge to recover is rarely just about money. It is about restoring pride. The internal dialogue shifts from "follow the system" to "I need to win this back." That shift is critical. It transforms trading from a process into a form of emotional compensation. Traders begin entering setups that don't fully meet their criteria, increasing position sizes to accelerate recovery, or taking impulsive trades just to feel back in control. In these moments, the objective is no longer execution quality, it is emotional repair. But the market does not reward intention. It responds only to probability. And when trades are taken outside of a tested system, the edge disappears. What follows is often a deeper loss, reinforcing the very frustration the trader was trying to escape. Opposite end of the spectrum is hesitation after loss. While some traders react with overactivity, others become overly cautious. A recent loss, especially one that felt significant, leaves an emotional imprint. The fear of being wrong again becomes more pronounced. Even when a valid setup appears, one that aligns perfectly with the trading plan, the trader hesitates. Doubt creeps in. What if this one fails too? That hesitation leads to missed opportunities. And missed opportunities create a different kind of frustration, one rooted in regret. Over time, pattern reduces participation in high-quality trades, which directly impacts consistency. A system can only perform if it is executed consistently across a large sample size. Valid setups breaks that sample, making results unreliable. Another subtle but damaging effect of personalization is emotional position sizing. In theory, position size should be consistent based on predefined risk parameters. In practice, many traders adjust size based on how they feel. Trades that look perfect or align with strong conviction are given larger size. Trades that feel uncertain, even if they meet all criteria, are taken with smaller size or skipped entirely. Creates inconsistency in risk exposure. When larger positions lose, the emotional and financial impact is amplified. When smaller positions win, the gains feel insignificant. Result is a distorted equity curve where losses hit harder than wins, even if the win rate remains stable over time. This imbalance undermines confidence in the system. In reality, the issue lies in inconsistent execution. Personalization also leads to breaking systems under stress. Trading strategy is typically developed and tested under calm conditions. It is structured, logical, and based on historical data. When real money is involved and pressure rises, structure begins to crack. Traders start deviating from their plan. They add new indicators mid-trade in search of confirmation. They exit positions early because holding them feels uncomfortable. Override signals because this time feels different. Each of these actions introduces randomness into a system that was designed to be systematic. The more a trader interferes, less the strategy resembles its tested form. And when results become inconsistent, the trader often blames the strategy rather than recognizing the behavioral deviation that caused the inconsistency. All of these patterns feed into what can be called the identity burnout cycle. It begins with a loss. That loss triggers an emotional reaction, frustration, doubt, or even self-criticism. In response, the trader attempts to compensate. This might take the form of overtrading, increasing risk, or forcing setups. The compensation often leads to a bigger mistake, intensifies the emotional response. Self-criticism deepens, confidence drops, and with reduced confidence, the next decision is made from an even more unstable emotional state. Cycle repeats, each loop reinforcing the connection between performance and identity. The trader is no longer operating from a place of clarity, but from a need to fix how they feel. Makes this cycle particularly damaging is that it is self-reinforcing. Each mistake becomes evidence that supports a negative self-image. I'm inconsistent. Control myself. These beliefs, once internalized, begin to shape future behavior. The trader expects to struggle, and that expectation influences their actions. It becomes a feedback loop where identity and behavior continuously validate each other. The measurable cost of personalization is not just emotional, it is statistical. Inconsistent position sizing alters risk-reward ratios. Mistrades reduce edge realization. Impulsive entries increase exposure to low probability setups. Early exits cut profits short. Extended losses magnify drawdowns. Over time, these factors compound, turning a potentially profitable system into an inconsistent one. Understanding this is crucial. Issue is not the market. It is not even the strategy. It is the layer of meaning placed on top of outcomes. When trades become personal, performance becomes unstable. When trades are treated as neutral events within a probabilistic system, consistency becomes possible. The difference lies not in what the market does, in how the trader interprets and responds to it. One of the most critical transitions a trader must make is learning to separate who they are from what they do. Long as trading outcomes are tied to identity, every loss feels personal, every mistake feels like a character flaw, and every drawdown becomes emotionally exhausting. The goal is not to eliminate emotion completely. That is unrealistic. But to remove identity from the equation so decisions can be made with clarity instead of self-protection. First shift begins with reframing your role. You are not in the market to predict what will happen next. Prediction implies certainty, and certainty creates ego attachment. Instead, your role is to manage risk within uncertainty. The market is not something to conquer or outsmart. It is an environment of probabilities. Every trade is simply one event in a long series of outcomes. When you internalize this, trading stops being about being right and starts being about executing a statistical edge. Shift alone removes a massive emotional burden because you are no longer seeking validation through outcomes. From here, the next step is to change what you measure. Traders track win rate and daily profit as their primary metrics. While these numbers are not irrelevant, they are dangerous if used as the main source of validation. They fluctuate naturally and can easily distort your perception of performance. Instead, focus on process-based metrics. Did you follow your rules? Did you execute your setup exactly as planned? Did you respect your risk parameters? Did you remain emotionally stable during the trade? These are the metrics that actually define long-term success. Validation shifts from outcome to execution quality. Consistency begins to replace emotional volatility. Another powerful tool is pre-defined risk acceptance. Before entering any trade, already be at peace with the potential loss. This means defining your risk clearly while you are calm and rational. Once the trade is live, There should be no negotiation, adjustment based on fear, and no emotional interference. The outcome has already been accepted. This creates a psychological boundary. The trade is no longer something happening to you, something playing out according to a predefined plan. When risk is accepted in advance, losses stop feeling like personal attacks and start feeling like normal business expenses. Position sizing plays a crucial role in emotional detachment. Many traders underestimate how strongly size influences perception. When the position is too large, even a small fluctuation feels significant. Your mind becomes hyperfocused, reactive, and emotionally charged. On the other hand, when the position size is appropriate, trade remains psychologically manageable. You can think clearly, follow your rules, and observe the market without stress. Emotional intensity is often not caused by the market itself, by exposure that exceeds your tolerance. Neutral risk leads to neutral thinking, and neutral thinking leads to better execution. Equally important is the language you use internally. You describe your trade's shapes how you experience them. If you say, "The market punished me," you are framing the outcome as personal, unfair, and targeted. Reinforces emotional reactions like frustration and resentment. Instead, shift your language to something objective. The trade did not meet expected probability, or this setup played out within normal variance. These phrases remove blame and replace it with analysis. Over time, change in internal dialogue rewires how you interpret outcomes, making you less reactive and more analytical. Ultimately, separating identity from execution is about creating psychological distance. You are not your last trade. You are not your win rate. You are not your P&L for the day, decision maker behind the process. When you focus on executing your system with discipline, consistency becomes your anchor. Wins and losses will still happen. They are unavoidable. They will no longer control your emotional state. The traders who survive and grow are not the ones who avoid losses. They are the ones who stop taking them personally. Identity is removed from the equation, clarity replaces ego, discipline replaces reaction, and performance becomes a byproduct of process rather than emotion. Emotional neutrality is not something you are born with. It is something you deliberately build. Most traders assume that discipline comes from willpower, but in reality, it comes from structure, awareness, and repetition. The goal is not to suppress emotion, but to reduce its influence on decision-making. When neutrality becomes a skill, consistency becomes possible. The foundation of this process begins with expectation calibration. Many traders enter the market with unrealistic assumptions, expecting high accuracy, equity curves, and constant progress. This creates an invisible pressure where every loss feels abnormal. In reality, losses are a natural part of any statistical distribution. Even the best systems experience drawdowns. When you accept this at a deep level, losses stop being surprising and start being expected. Shift removes emotional shock and replaces it with stability. You are no longer reacting to losses. You are prepared for them. From there, scenario planning becomes essential. Emotional reactions in trading are not random. They happen because the mind is unprepared. When you lose multiple trades in a row, hit a weekly drawdown, or feel emotional overwhelm, your brain searches for immediate relief, often leading to impulsive decisions. Scenario planning removes this uncertainty. Before you trade, define exactly what you will do in these situations. If you lose 3 trades in a row, will you stop for the day? If you reach a certain drawdown, will you reduce size or step away? If your emotional intensity crosses a threshold, you pause and reset. By pre-committing to these actions, you eliminate the need for decision-making under pressure. The plan takes over when emotions rise. A critical component is post-trade review without judgment. Most traders review their trades through the lens of self-criticism. Questions like, "Why am I so bad at this?" or "What is wrong with me?" This reinforces negative identity and emotional attachment. Instead, your review process must be neutral and structured. Ask only objective questions. Did I follow my rules? Was my risk controlled? Was my execution clean? These questions focus on behavior, identity. Over time, this builds self-trust because you begin to see yourself as someone who executes a process rather than someone who is constantly failing or succeeding. To strengthen this further, emotional baseline training should become part of your routine. After each trading session, take a few minutes to journal your emotional state. Did you feel during trades? How intense were those emotions on a scale from 1 to 10? Did anything trigger frustration, fear, or overconfidence? Purpose is not to judge these emotions, but to observe them. When you consistently track your emotional patterns, you begin to notice trends. Certain setups may trigger anxiety, certain losses may trigger revenge behavior, and certain wins may lead to overconfidence. Awareness creates separation. Separation reduces their control. What you can observe, you can manage. Equally important is developing a long-term perspective. One of the biggest drivers of emotional instability is a narrow time horizon. You focus too much on a single trade or even a single day, every outcome feels significant. This magnifies emotional reactions and increases personalization. In reality, a single trade is meaningless. Even a full week or month is a small sample size in the context of a trading career. When you expand your time horizon, outcomes begin to smooth out, become less threatening, and wins become less intoxicating. You start to see performance as a process that unfolds over time, not something defined by short-term results. At the core of emotional neutrality is the acceptance of uncertainty. Markets are not predictable in the way most people want them to be. You are not here to control outcomes or compete against the market. You are here to manage your own decision quality within an uncertain environment. That distinction is crucial. The moment you stop trying to force certainty, frustration decreases. You no longer expect the market to behave in a way that validates you. You focus on executing your edge with consistency, regardless of outcome. When all of these elements come together, a clear understanding begins to form. The market is impersonal. It does not know you, and it does not act against you. Personalization is a cognitive distortion, a mental habit that turns neutral outcomes into emotional experiences. The more attached you become to individual trades, the more inconsistent your behavior becomes. Emotional attachment leads to overtrading, hesitation, and poor risk management. Detachment, on the other hand, creates clarity. It allows you to see trades for what they are, probabilities playing out over time. Your identity, therefore, must shift. It should not be tied to whether you win or lose, to how well you execute your process, your consistency, and your emotional control. These are the traits that define a trader, not short-term results. When identity is anchored in execution, confidence becomes stable because it is no longer dependent on outcomes you cannot control. Trading becomes less stressful the moment it stops being about proving something and starts being about executing a process with discipline.